Well, the 15-minute address ending the trip here to the United States, really talking about climate change. Climate change, the focus on the last day of this trip. He was pretty fired up, I would say, and defending Australia and what it has done to tackle climate change, saying some of these myth-truths are being peddled by activists, potentially with an agenda. Let's just recap what he said.
Australia's internal, though, and global critics on climate change willingly overlook or perhaps ignore our achievements, as the facts simply don't fit the narrative they wish to project about our contribution. Australia is responsible for just 1.3% of global emissions. Australia is doing our bit on climate change, and we reject any suggestion to the contrary.
Now, Pete, there would have been some people in the room, indeed outside the room, that wanted to see Scott Morrison go further on the Paris commitments promised by a few prime ministers ago in 2016. But he didn't do that, stating once again that Australia meets and beats their commitments. That is our track record. So it remains a 26 to 28% commitment to reduce emissions on 2005 levels by 2030, describing this as credible and reliable.
This is a credible, fair, responsible and achievable contribution to global climate change action. It represents a halving of our emissions per person in Australia, or a two-thirds reduction in emissions per unit of gross domestic product.
He didn't name names or name countries, but he did have a few gripes as well, talking about illegal fishing and some nations not doing enough to clamp down on this. And this is basically doing the wrong thing by their neighbours. So urging the United Nations to reform and get back to the commitment, I guess, to enforce the rules-based order.
The UN is the prime custodian of the rules-based order. It is also the custodian of mechanisms for dialogue and adjudication which buttress them. It has a challenging task ahead of it. For Australia's part, we will continue to practice what we preach.
So there you have it, really returning to what Australia has been spruiking via Scott Morrison for the last week, that we are good global citizens, we abide by the rules-based order. There's been a lot of focus on China this week, but this is the last event. I've got to say, Pete, this is the last hour or so in New York for Scott Morrison. He heads home in just 20 minutes' time, and no doubt, I think we could call it a successful visit. It's certainly been successful in drawing our two nations together. I think he'll be heading home and waiting on that invitation from Beijing.